Many people know that international applications to US universities are a very complex process, and there are important exams that all students must take when applying to US universities. But the one exam that every single student, international student, must take is the TOEFL iBT. So in today's presentation, Lucas will discuss all of the knowledge that he has about what this exam is about, what types of question it involves, and all of the tips and suggestions you need to score well on this exam. So our webinar series with Education USA, every month we're trying to offer different perspectives, whether it be for international exam preparation or advice from different admission offices. And we hope that today's expert advice from Lucas will be beneficial to you and to your students. Just out of curiosity, if you could type in the chat box where you are logging in from today, that would be perfect to see what countries are joining us. I see different advisors from Bolivia, and I know that we have a special viewing party in Cusco with over 30 students. So thank you all for joining us. And after you comment in the chat box, or while you comment in the chat box, I will go ahead and pass the microphone to Lucas Fink so he can begin his introduction and begin his presentation. Take it away, Lucas.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, so as you heard, my name is Lucas. I am the TOEFL expert at Magoosh. I teach the TOEFL iBT. I've been teaching the TOEFL iBT since 2009, and for the last about 2 years, I've been working at Magoosh as the TOEFL expert, which means that I spend my days thinking about the TOEFL all day, thinking about how the test is created and how we can bring students higher scores. So I'm here to talk to you just a little bit about the test, to introduce it, give an overview of what you will see on the test and what you can expect. So let's get started. As we said, I'm from Magoosh. This is our logo, and the TOEFL logo, which is the TOEFL is made by a company called ETS. ETS also makes the GRE, and in a form, they also make the SAT, if you know those tests. Now, what does TOEFL stand for? It is the Test of English as a Foreign Language. So this actually should be TEFL, but that abbreviation is taken by Teaching English as a Foreign Language. So the test makers had to add the O in there to make it TOEFL instead of TEFL. The IBT specifically is the internet-based test. There are different types of TOEFL, but the TOEFL iBT is the most important one. The IBT is what you see in 97% or maybe even 98% of tests. It is a very different test than the PBT. It is the only option for most people. You will only be able to take the IBT in almost all countries. In fact, the only South American country I could find that uses the PBT was Suriname. So most of you will be taking the IBT if you take the TOEFL. That is the internet-based test. The PBT is just for countries that have less internet access. ETS wants to get rid of the PBT very soon. They want to eliminate it and use only the IBT. Now, keep in mind, if you do take the PBT, most of the information I'm going to talk about from here forward will not be true. The PBT is a different test entirely. All right, what's on the TOEFL? Well, for one, there's academic skills. After all, the TOEFL is a test for university entrance in American colleges and American universities. Academic skills involve note-taking, summarizing, etc. These are the skills that you would do in an American university, in a classroom situation. You need to be able to deal with academic information in an academic context and respond to it in English with academic English. But it's more than just that. It's also your general language skills, your ability in English, your vocabulary, your grammar, your pronunciation, and all of that. But I will tell you right now, there is no vocabulary section on the TOEFL, and there's no grammar section on the TOEFL. Many other English tests that you might have taken in your life have a whole section devoted to grammar. In the TOEFL, it is only tested through your skills. So it's tested through your reading ability, through your speaking ability, through your writing ability, and through your listening ability. You do not get questions like, what tense should this verb be? Or what does this word mean out of context? You do see some vocabulary questions in the reading section, but they are in the context of a longer passage. So what is not on the TOEFL? As I mentioned, grammar exercises. Also, logic-based questions. The types of questions you might see on the GRE or the GMAT or other university entrance exams aren't on the TOEFL. It's only about language. Your language skills, your English skills are the only important thing. You do not need to analyze an argument and decide what, for example, what is the flaw, the problem in an argument, or how an argument could or should be better. Nothing like that. Mostly, if you have an argument, then you just summarize it. You don't need to analyze. And finally, there's no personal interaction. If you take the IELTS, the IELTS, that test actually has some personal interaction. You talk in real life with another human being. On the TOEFL, you don't talk with anybody. You only speak into a microphone for the speaking section. So there is no face-to-face personal conversation. It's all on the computer. There's also no truly authentic material. All of the things that you listen to on the TOEFL are actors, and all of the things that you read are adapted especially for the TOEFL. There's nothing, for example, from a newspaper. There's no recording of a person speaking in real life. It's all created specifically for the TOEFL. And that means that the language level is more, it's not easier. Most of it is actually quite high language level. It's quite advanced vocabulary. But it's more standard. It's around the same difficulty, compared with a conversation which might vary in difficulty quite a lot in real life when you have someone who speaks English more clearly and uses easier vocabulary compared to somebody who speaks too quickly and uses a lot of slang. On the TOEFL, you don't have that variety. It's more standardized. All right, so let's actually look at what the test is made of. There are 4 sections on the TOEFL. The first one is the reading section. And after that, you get the listening section. Then you have a break, a short break, but you have to take a full 10 minutes for your break. You want to take a full 10 minutes. It's a 4-hour test, so that break is really important. And then you have speaking after that. And finally, the last section is the writing section. Now, there is an experimental part of the test that is in the reading or listening section. It is not a separate section. It just means that either the reading or the listening will be extra long. So there is part of the test that is not graded, that's not scored. You can't identify which section it is, which text it is, or which recording it is. You don't know. So you have to try equally hard on all of the reading and listening, but there will be something in there that makes the reading extra long or makes the listening extra long and is not scored. Speaking of scoring, the IBT is scored from 0 to 120. By the way, as I mentioned, very different test. The PBT is on a completely different scale. I believe it's from 310 to 677 for some strange reason. I don't know why. But the TOEFL iBT is from 0 to 120, and it's made up of 4 scores from 0 to 30. That is, each section can give you points up to 30. Now, that does not reflect how many right or wrong answers you have perfectly. It doesn't mean you got 29 right answers, so you got a score of 29. The raw score is a little bit different. It comes before they scale the score to the 1 to 30 scale. The change from raw score to scaled score is very complicated, and it varies from test to test. So if I take the IBT on Saturday and I take it again on Wednesday, I'm going to see 2 different versions of the IBT. And one might be a little bit more difficult. So if Saturday was a little bit more difficult, then you would have a different scale up to 30. So because of the variety and difficulty, the scaling from raw to scaled scores, the 30-point score, is a little bit difficult to explain and to really know simply. The scores that people want are usually 80, 90, or 100. The most common goal score is 100 plus. Most schools will take 100 plus. Some schools actually do require higher. I have heard of schools requiring up to 115 out of 120. That is almost native. You might be a native speaker and score 111. So if you don't know the test well already. So very few schools require scores that high. And just for some context, a score of 80 is conversational, so that you can talk with a native speaker comfortably, but might have some trouble reading a newspaper and understanding every sentence, and occasionally will need other people to repeat themselves using different words so that they can understand. So an 80 is still very advanced English, and if you're listening to me now, you are probably in a range where you would take the TOEFL, but I'm speaking more clearly and slowly than some parts on the TOEFL, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're already at 80 plus. Now, what score you personally need depends on your school, where you're going to apply to. Different schools have different requirements. So you need to check on the university websites what scores are needed for you personally at your schools where you're going to apply. I cannot just tell you that 100 is a good score. For some people, it's not the right score. Some people need a 95. Some people need 110. You can also get conditional acceptance. That means, for example, if a school requires 80 points or 90 points, but you only score 70, it is possible at some schools that you could still be accepted with a conditional acceptance. That conditional is that usually that you take an extra course, that you study English in your first year at the university in order to meet the English requirement. This is not true at very competitive colleges, very competitive universities often, because simply they have so many applicants they don't need to. They have enough really high quality applicants who already score higher than the recommended score. But at some schools, conditional acceptance is a possibility. So if your score is too low, check, find out. All right, now let's talk about the reading section. What's on it? Here's an example of what the reading section looks like. On the right-hand side, you see a text, and on the left, you see a question. This is an excerpt from a text. Actually, the real TOEFL, the text will be about 2 times as long as that. And this is what the software looks like generally. It looks like Windows software from about 1998. And the texts themselves, what you see there, are from academic textbooks, from university textbooks. So they explain something about, oh, I'm sorry, I accidentally went back. Let me get back to my slide. 36, there we go. Now, here we go. Right, we have academic text from textbooks, basically. They will be introductory, though. You don't need to know anything about the topic beforehand. You don't need any outside knowledge. All the information you need is in the test. And after you read a passage, you will get 12 to 14 questions on that passage. And for every set of a text and 12, 13, or 14 questions, you get 20 minutes. But that's actually in full. So you'll see possibly 3 passages, each with questions, and you'll get 60 minutes to answer all the questions and read all the texts. Or you'll see 4 texts, and you'll get 80 minutes to do the same thing. You need to budget your time carefully in the reading section. And all of the questions are basically multiple choice. Some of them are drag and drop, moving a sentence to a specific place in a table or to a place in the text, but mostly it's multiple choice. The first 10 or 11 questions in a section are all multiple choice. The most common things that you need to answer those questions are synonyms and rephrasings of what was in the text. Because, as I said, all the information to answer the question is in the text. Now, think about this. If the people who make the TOEFL just use the same words in the answer choices, that makes it really easy because you just find the same words. So that's why they rely heavily on synonyms and rephrasing. If you can identify that these words mean the same thing and the grammar structures mean the same thing, then that's likely going to be the correct answer because it matches the text. So wrong answers are created by using incorrect synonyms, words that don't really represent the meaning of the text, and by changing the structure of a sentence or an idea so that the grammar doesn't make sense. The most common problems that people have, the first one is the timing. The clock causes a big problem because 20 minutes to read a long text and then answer 14 questions is not a lot of time. You need to really budget your time carefully. Many students find that they only have 5 minutes left when they reach the last passage, and 5 minutes is not enough time. So there are a couple of ways to get around that problem, but one of them is to answer the questions while you read. That is, to skip forward to the questions before you read the text, read the first question, then go to the text and read the text until you find the answer to the first question. Then answer the question, move on to question number 2, and if you can already answer it, great. If not, go back to the text and continue reading until you find the answer to number 2. The questions come in order, in the same order that is on the test. So you can actually use that to your advantage through this strategy. I don't recommend the strategy for everybody. Lower level students sometimes have trouble following all the information, understanding the text and the question at the same time, and keeping everything in mind while trying to figure out the meaning of a word, for example. And in that case, I recommend reading the text first and then going to the questions. Another common problem is focus. You ever find yourself reading and rereading and rereading the same sentence? That can be a disaster on the TOEFL. So if you can't follow, if you're having trouble keeping your attention and your focus on the text, it helps to summarize what you read. This gives you a purpose while you're reading. So you think about the paragraph as a whole, try to find the key information from that paragraph, and summarize it. After the reading section, you get the listening section. And in the listening section, we have 6 or 9 recordings. You know how earlier I mentioned that there's an experimental part of the test? Well, in the reading section, if it is experimental, you'll have 4 texts. In the listening section, if it is experimental, you'll get 9 recordings. One of the 2 will be experimental and therefore longer. So you'll either get a long reading with 4 passages or a long listening with 9 recordings. Now, each of those recordings lasts about 3 to 5 minutes. They're pretty short, and they are made of lectures and conversations. They are mostly lectures. So you'll either get 4 lectures and 2 conversations, or 6 lectures and 3 conversations. Now, in those recordings, you have no control. You cannot rewind. You cannot repeat. You can't change anything. You can't pause it. You can only listen, and you have to listen when they tell you to listen. You cannot listen again afterwards. You can't repeat anything. So that means you need good notes and a good memory, because all the questions come after the listening. You can't reference the listening at all. And those multiple choice questions will be about very specific details from the recording. The problems that people have, well, you can imagine one of them is memory, and actually knowing what was on the in the recording. That's why notes are so important. And this first one here I have is focus. I think I got my points out of order here, but that's okay. Focus, just like on the reading, except it's even more important in the listening, because if you are not paying attention during the recording, when you're supposed to be listening, you will miss information and you cannot go back to hear it again. So you need to pay very careful attention and stay focused. Personally, I like to close my eyes for a lot of it, and I put my hands over my ears, over the headphones that they give you, and try to imagine the scene and the professor that's talking, or the people who are talking. And I try to think about what they're going to say next. And when I have an understanding of some important point, then I open my eyes and I take notes. Another common problem, though, is too many notes. This is one of the most common problems that students have with listening. If you're trying to write everything you hear, you're going to fail. Not fail the TOEFL, just fail hearing everything. It is an unrealistic goal. You cannot write everything down. You need to only write sometimes when you hear something important. So that means listening and then writing down the structure of what you heard, the structure of the lecture. Using very short notes also helps. For all of these advice slides like this one, there's plenty more advice out there. On our blog, for example, you'll find a lot more advice. But I'm just giving a few of the most common problems and some of the most important tips. There are definitely other tips, lots more advice out there. All right, so next we have the speaking. And the speaking is the shortest section of the test. It runs at just about 20 minutes. And in that 20 minutes, you get 6 speaking tasks. Now, they're not all questions exactly. Some of them are a little bit unique to the TOEFL. The first 2 are just questions about you, about your thoughts, about your experience. So, for example, you might get a question like, Name an important person from your childhood and explain why they were important to you. Or you might have to decide between two things. The second task is a decision. Do you like going on vacation in warm places or colder places? Explain why. But after those two are finished about your personal experience, then you get a change. We go back to getting lectures and conversations. You will read and listen. Now, in questions 3 and 4, you get one conversation and one lecture. Similarly, in questions 5 and 6, you get one conversation and one lecture. In questions 5 and 6, you only have to listen. All 4 of these integrated tasks that involve reading, listening, and speaking, all of them are about academic life and academic topics. So you might hear a conversation between a student and their professor, and then you might hear a lecture on the same type of topic that you would see in the reading or in the listening section of the test. And all 4 of these are very short as well. Really, all 6 of them are very short. For the first 2, you only speak for 45 seconds. And for the latter 4, that is the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th task, you speak for a total of 1 minute each. You can imagine that some of the problems here arise from that length. It's hard to speak and get all the information you need in just 1 minute. Now, that's especially true because in these conversations and lectures, there's a lot of information, and you need to summarize as much of it as possible. Many people make the mistake of trying to summarize everything, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the first thing is distraction. The biggest problem is distraction. This is a really big problem because you're going to be in a room with, say, 20 other people, possibly 10, sometimes 30, and everybody is going to be speaking at the same time. You will have you'll have headphones and a microphone, but the person next to you will also have headphones and a microphone speaking to their computer. So it can be very hard to stay focused on the question and answering it when you hear all these other people giving other answers to other questions. Now, I don't exactly have a solution to that problem, but it can help to outline what you're going to say. You have a very short time to outline before each task, either 15, 20, or 30 seconds, depending on the task. And then watch your outline. Look at what you wrote and stay focused on using that outline and speaking about the topics that you prepared for. Another problem, not knowing the format. If you don't know that question 5, for example, is going to be a conversation between 2 students in which one student has a problem and they offer 2 solutions, and when you summarize it, you need to explain the problem, the solutions, and your opinion, then all of that can be a little bit difficult to deal with at one time. It's a complicated task. In order to get better at that, well, you just need to practice. You need to learn the test. Know exactly what you will see in each individual task. All right, and finally, the last section on the TOEFL is the writing section. It is made of 2 essays. There is one essay that is what they call integrated, just like the integrated speaking tasks. You first read and listen, and then summarize what you heard and read. In both the speaking and the writing, the listening is more important. You have to summarize what you heard especially. The text gives some extra information, some context, an introduction, but it doesn't give the most important details. The most important details are in the listening, in the recording. So you write about what you heard, you just summarize it, you don't need to analyze it, and you don't need to give your opinion. And that is a short essay at just 20 minutes. Then there's a longer essay at 30 minutes, and they expect it to be longer too. That is about your opinion, your experience, your thoughts. And this is actually very similar to speaking task number 2. That is, they give you a choice between two options, like vacation in a warm place or vacation in a cold place. You choose one and talk about why. For example, I have on a TOEFL seen before, should we continue going to the moon or should we stop going to the moon? And you just give your thoughts. You don't have to have any background information or background knowledge, but just give your thoughts, whatever they are. Even if you are wrong, it's fine, with the best language that you can. All right. Now, common problems in the writing section. This is one of the saddest problems I see, because I know students think that they have a text, so they should use the text. They should rephrase some of what they read. But that's really a bad idea. Anything that you copy from the text will not help your essay score. It will only hurt you by copying. You can use one of the words or two of the words or a phrase that is in the text, but if you rely heavily on repeating what you read, you're not going to get a high score on the integrated essay. You need to summarize the listening especially and use your own words. All right, and as I said, don't copy from the passage. Next problem is that there's not enough variety in sentence structures. You should be able to change your sentences between long and short sentences with correct grammar, and more advanced structures and simpler structures, depending on what is most useful for what you want to communicate. A real native speaker will vary their sentences, but a beginning English speaker will write the same types of sentences again and again. So you need to have that variety to show that you know many different styles, lengths, constructions of English sentences. All right, so that's what's on the test. Now let's quickly talk about how you take it. Registration for the TOEFL changes from country to country, but it's $160 to $250. In the US, I believe it's $180. I don't remember off the top of my head. In Japan, I think it's $250. It varies. So check out what the price is in your country. I see that in Peru, it's $200. Thank you for that. $250 in Brazil. Good to know. Okay. Some varied prices. It's all pretty expensive, though. You don't want to have to take the TOEFL 10 times, right? You want to take it as few times as possible because it's pricey. Before you register for the test, or rather before the test date, when you register, you can choose which schools to send scores to. So if, for example, I'm going to take the test in July, well, in June I can decide that I want to send my scores to Yale and Harvard and Stanford. I'm going to some very competitive schools. And I can do that for free, and they will send the scores for free. But after I take the test, if I decide, wait a minute, I also want to send my scores to Princeton, then every time I do that, it costs $19. But this can be very advantageous. If you don't mind spending the money, this can really help, because you can choose which scores you send. If you take the test twice, then if you decide to send your scores for free when you register, then both of those scores will go to all the schools that you send them to. But if you choose your scores after, then you can choose only the scores from the higher test. So if you think you might take the test more than once, I recommend not sending your scores for free and instead paying to send individual scores after so that you can choose which ones go to which schools. And thank you for clarifying that it is 4 free score reports. I know I mentioned 3 schools, but it's 4 free reports. Studying. How do you study for the TOEFL? There are basically 3 ways to study, 3 different things you can study. The first one is the text structure, the test structure. As I mentioned, this is very important for the speaking section especially. Getting to know the speaking section is a huge help. It's also very true for the listening section. It helps to just find out what you will see and what to expect. This is pretty quick. Most students who are only learning the test structure study for a month or even less, but it brings the least amount of improvement because you're only learning what you'll see. You're not actually improving your English or improving your skills. That takes longer. There are test skills like note-taking that are so important for the TOEFL, but maybe you don't do often in real life. If you just practice those, you can make improvement in shorter time than doing general improvement. But it does take longer than simply learning the structure of the test. And finally, I just mentioned it, improving your English in general can also help. And, well, you all know that English in general takes a long time to improve. I have seen students that have studied for 2 years just to improve their general English skills for the TOEFL specifically. That is, people who have studied the test for 2 years continually, and in doing that, we're trying to bring up their English skills in total. All right. Some resources that you should study with. The best resource for practice questions is official material. There are 2 books that are the best deal for your money, the best price with the most practice. And the first one, first there is free material, so you can go to this website for the free material. But that has a lot less material than the books, and the official guide has 3 full-length practice tests on CD that are very similar to what you will see on the computer at a real TOEFL iBT on test day. And those same 3 tests are also in the book on paper, just in case you want to do the tests on paper, maybe if you're, I don't know, on the train or something. A lot of this book is actually just description of the test. If you don't know the TOEFL very well, which I'm assuming you don't because you're here today, then this can be very helpful. But if you'd already studied the TOEFL for a long time, then a lot of this book is not very helpful because it just describes the test. It says how long the texts are, how many questions there are, what types of questions you see. And if you have already studied the TOEFL, that's not very helpful information. Next is the book of 5 official practice tests. I love this book. I wish that it came with a CD that had computer tests. Unfortunately, the CD only has audio that you can play. It does not have software, so there is no computer test here that mimics the actual IBT, the internet-based computer test. But it has 5 practice tests for very cheap. It is a fantastic resource for extra practice questions, especially for the reading and listening. Okay, and now we have some of our own material that we'd like to mention. We have a blog for you at magoosh.com/TOEFL, and our blogger David posts regularly with grammar advice and with TOEFL tips specific to the test as well. So that runs the range from people who are trying to improve their general English all the way to people who are only trying to learn the format of the test. It's all there on the blog, and we continue to update it regularly. We also have flashcards for people who are trying to learn academic vocabulary. If you are a Spanish or Portuguese speaker, which I assume many, if not all of you are, then some of the academic vocabulary is going to be pretty easy because it's all Latin-based. In English, academic vocabulary is usually based on Latin. But our flashcards do include the 200 most common academic words that you will see on the TOEFL. And finally, we also have a YouTube channel, and that's me. That's a picture of me giving advice, just like I am right now on the TOEFL, talking about what's a good TOEFL score. So you can watch our videos there. We post a new TOEFL video every Tuesday that gives some additional advice. We call them TOEFL Tuesdays. And some other book recommendations from unofficial and non-Magoosh sources, some of my favorite books. I really like The Complete Guide to the TOEFL Test. This book has a ton of practice, so much practice, and it's pretty high quality. It's hard to make material that's exactly like the real stuff. And to be perfectly honest, nobody makes questions exactly like ETS. Every non-official source is a little bit different. We try very hard at Magoosh, as does everybody, and I think that we come the closest personally, but the actual test is always a little bit different. The Complete Guide has a ton of high-quality material, lots and lots of high-quality material, and skill practice as well, so note-taking practice, etc. And the problem with it is that the answers are separate. You actually have to buy a separate book to get the answers. Even then, the answers are not very fully explained. So it's not perfect. I also like Cambridge Preparation. This was the first good TOEFL book I found that I started teaching from years ago. And this book actually doesn't have as good practice. The practice material has some flaws. There are a lot of questions that are too difficult, but it has a ton of skill building practice like note taking. If you want to improve your note taking skills or any other test specific skills, Cambridge is great for that. One other little problem with Cambridge though, you need to buy a set of 8 CDs that is not cheap. The CDs come separate from the book also. Both of these books in US dollars usually cost somewhere between $60 and $90. That is if you get the full set, if you get the book and the answers or the book and the CDs for the Cambridge Preparation. And I actually have a lot more on our blog, more book reviews. You can read a lot more about Cambridge Preparation and the Complete Guide and other books too, including Barron's, Kaplan's, etc. And you can see what's good or bad about those books so that you can decide what book you want to buy if you want to buy a book. And our final slide here is just some more links on websites for both Education USA and our website, magoosh.com, and some contact information. And from here, we're going to move to the question and answer part of the webinar, and we'll hear from Kelly in just a minute.
All right, Lucas. Wow, I've been taking down multiple notes, and I hope that most of the students and advisors watching are also copying and pasting these links that Lucas has provided and that I've copied again in the chat section. Right just before we begin answering questions, I wanted to highlight the importance of this webinar. As advisors know, but as students might not know, for admissions in U.S. universities, it's really not just about one exam or 2 exams, it's about a process. So we always recommend that students go onto the educationusa.info 5 Steps to Study site so that you understand where the TOEFL fits into your process. But at the same time, the importance of English in your application to U.S. schools, super important, and the TOEFL iBT exam is the international English exam to prove your academic English readiness to study in the U.S. I've also provided my email here because I can answer maybe some questions about the application process that Lucas wasn't able to touch upon in this presentation because he focused on his TOEFL expertise. We're also on Facebook and Education USA Peru. So if you like us and you like Magoosh and you like your Education USA Bolivia or Brazil or Venezuela Facebook sites, you'll definitely be able to keep up to date with all of this information. So Lucas, I was able to jot down 2 preliminary questions. One was from Luis Marcelo about the reading practice resources. You mentioned a couple of the books and the sites, but maybe you can also mention about, what other ways a student who wants to do well on the TOEFL, how can that person, apart from just maybe one book, really reinforce their English reading abilities, maybe like on a day-to-day basis, like some common exercises?
That's a great question. So first of all, keep in mind that all of the texts on the TOEFL are academic, right? That means that it can be kind of difficult to find similar texts, but you really want the highest difficulty that you're comfortable with. You want to challenge yourself and go for the most difficult texts you can. I usually recommend using a real English news source that has a lot of academic style of articles. For example, like the New Yorker or the Atlantic or the Economist even. Those are actually very difficult, but you can find some sort of scientific articles in those that can really help. Also, aldaily.com is a great resource for that. AL Daily gives you a list of articles from many different newspapers, magazines, websites that are relatively academic. So if you use that material, just real English material, now how can you actually read it to help you prepare for the TOEFL? A couple of things. I recommend practicing your focus, that is summarizing what you read very often. That's especially helpful because so much of the TOEFL is about summarizing. In the speaking and writing sections, you need to summarize a lot. So when you are reading an article like that, it's a good idea to stop after every paragraph or 2 paragraphs and summarize what you have read so far. That helps you both in staying focused and also in giving that response, giving that spoken or written response. Besides that, let's see.
There was also a question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oops.
Please.
I wanted to jump on another question. An advisor in Brazil asked about other types of exercises or ways a student can manage their time. Like I know at the exam, are you able to enter with a what do you call it? A watch? No, right? To exam centers?
I'm sorry, I'm not fully sure I understand the question. Could you explain that one more time?
Yes. Time management is very important on the TOEFL. Students, I don't believe, are able to enter test centers with a watch. Can you mention a little bit about how they can manage their time then? Like maybe
Yeah.
should I be under a minute, 2 minutes? What kind of rhythm?
So it's true that you're not allowed to enter with a watch, but the entire time during the whole test, if time is important, then there is a clock on the screen that tells you how much time you have. So you don't need a watch. In fact, it's better than a watch because you only need the timer that's on the screen. Now, managing your time as for like how you actually do it, that's something that takes a lot of practice, and it depends on the person, you know. Every once in a while I have a student who finishes the reading section in 40 minutes out of the 60. And that's crazy because even native speakers would take longer than that sometimes. Meanwhile, there are some students who really work too slowly for the pace of the TOEFL in the reading section. So knowing what exactly to do to time yourself better depends on how much time you need to save. So another example in the reading section, it can help to answer all the vocabulary questions first because they are very short, quick questions that don't actually require you to read the text. They are about vocabulary from the text, but mostly it just says, here's a word, choose the synonym, basically. So if you do those first, you can save some time and get a bunch of answers in earlier. Specific strategies like that vary. There are many of them, and it depends on exactly your situation, but just keep in mind that you will always know how much time you have. One other little piece of advice for the speaking section, timing can really help if you structure your answers. That means like introduce your topic, then give detail 1 and explain detail 1, then give detail 2 and explain detail 2, and if you still have time, summarize what you already said. So that kind of structure can help you use the 60 seconds appropriately. 15 seconds on the introduction, 15 seconds on point 1, 15 on point 2, 15 on the summary, for example. That's not a great structure, but you get the idea.
There also seems to be a lot of interest in how to improve on the writing section, especially when you talk about integrated writing. Do you have any like extra advice on maybe what kind of things students could do to better prepare for that writing part?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned before, when you're reading academic texts, it helps to stop and summarize what you read. Write your summary. Write a full, your own words summary of what you just read. Don't copy anything. Do it from memory only and use all your own words. Similarly, listen to lectures. Go to TED.com is a great resource for some academic style lectures and talks on various topics. A lot of really interesting material there. Listen to a lecture, a talk, and after, write a summary of what you heard. Try to use all your own words. So that kind of constant summarizing will train you for the integrated part because that is what the integrated essay is. It is a summary of a lecture. Another thing I always recommend to students is reading your own essays again later and correcting them. So after you write an essay, put it aside for a week or maybe 2 weeks, and then come back to the essay and correct it. And then write it again, better. And then put that aside and come back to it 2 weeks later and write it again, better. This is a great way to identify your common mistakes. Because if you learn a grammar point in between the first time you wrote the essay and when you revised it later, you get to correct yourself based on the new grammar that you learned, which really reinforces that grammar and helps you to remember it as you continue. So revise, 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 and write, write, write.
I think there was something that you mentioned also during the speaking section that I think maybe I can give you a couple of tips. A lot of students, you have to be lucky sometimes in the type of center that you go to take your TOEFL. There are some centers that have been doing this examination for a long time and have high quality administrative staff and computers and internet connection, and some that don't. So what we recommend our students, at least here in Lima, is we always, have conversations about where was your test site? Did you, was it a safe place? Was it a clean place? Was it an organized place? And so internally, we can always suggest to our students, these centers have always had high ratings. So maybe consider them before signing up for any date. And I think this also benefits students who plan in advance. Because when you plan in advance, you can, do extra research, call centers, find out what their size is, how many students will test. And this will all help you as opposed to waiting maybe for the last chance to test, and then you have to sign up pretty much anywhere, and maybe it's sadly in the center that is not going to offer you the quality testing experience you need. So that was just a comment I wanted to make.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I will just back that up. I've heard plenty of horror stories from students about really bad experiences in test centers. For example, I had a student who was in the middle of a speaking task, and one of the administrators came over to him and tapped him on the shoulder while he was speaking and told him to lower his voice, which is understandable, but his conversation with the administrator ended up in his speaking task, and he wasn't able to answer the full question because of it, which would be very frustrating, I'm sure you could imagine. So yeah, I absolutely agree with Kelly there.
Mm-hmm. And then two other things. I don't know if this is something that every student knows about yet, but every Education USA advisor should know. ETS is really cracking down on fraud. So what tended to happen before is students could sign up for the TOEFL iBT, maybe using their first name and just their first last name. But now the policy is, really being applied that students to be allowed into test centers must have all of their names exactly as they appear on their passport on their registration form. And we've actually seen students in Peru be turned away from centers, losing $200 because they were not allowed to test because not all of their names appeared on their confirmation sheet. So even though you believe that in the US, most people just use their first name and last name, when you register for any of your exams, TOEFL, GRE, SAT, GMAT, always register using absolutely all of your names exactly as they appear on your passport or national document. And finally, I wanted to mention something very briefly, because I know we have to go soon, about the speaking section. Lucas, maybe you could offer me some insight. Most of the students who I've seen score low in the speaking section said that they scored low because they didn't know how to answer the question honestly or truthfully. They were thinking about it. I heard in a previous reunion with another colleague of mine, what about if you just lie when you answer a question, Maybe
Yes.
The question is, I don't know, what do you do in your free time? And you don't do anything. Just lie and say you take long walks on the beach or something. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, yeah, lie. It's only actually relevant to the first two questions in the speaking task. So, if that does happen to you, that you're stuck, you can't think of an answer, and you're silent for too long, you actually have plenty of other opportunities to bring up your score in tasks 3, 4, 5, and 6. But yes, if you are having trouble answering it, it doesn't matter what your answer is. It doesn't matter whether or not it's the truth. You just need to think of the first thing that you can explain. So usually that does mean the truth. If, for example, I ask you cats or dogs, choose one. Most people will say what they actually do prefer immediately, and they will have reasons for it, and that's why they prefer them. So usually it ends up being the truth. That's the easiest to explain. But if you're having trouble coming up with the truth, then lie. That's true for the writing task as well. There, in the independent writing task, there may be plenty of points that you can make, that you can explain, which are not actually your opinion. That's okay. If you can use them, then do it. Use them.
And with that suggestion on lying on an international exam, I'd like to give you all the minutes you need, Lucas, to just wrap up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking with you all. I hope everybody learned something.
I'm sure many of us did, and advisors as well. So as I mentioned, many of you were interested in Lucas's PowerPoint. Many of you were interested in maybe having a recording link to this webinar. I will make the recording available tomorrow on our social media, Education USA Peru. So don't worry about that, and you'll have access to it tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining us. It's a record hit for us, about 67, 68 participants from countries such as Venezuela, Bolivia, Brazil, Peru, I'm thinking even Colombia. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank
Yep,
you, Lucas,
thanks.
and thank you, Magoosh.
Bye-bye.
Alrighty.